You've probably wondered your entire life, why me? Why was I born into this family? You look at your childhood, the dysfunction, the toxicity, the trauma, and you can't understand why you, of all people, had to endure it. You see people with loving, stable families and feel the unfairness of your situation. And the question haunts you, what did I do to deserve this? Carl Jung discovered something that will completely change how you understand your difficult origins. You weren't born into a toxic family as punishment. You were born into it as preparation. And the reason why will transform your relationship with your past. Because Jung found that the strongest souls, those destined for deep awakening and profound transformation, are almost always born into the most challenging family environments, not by accident, by necessity. Today I'm revealing why Jung said strong souls require toxic families, what your difficult childhood was actually preparing you for, and why your suffering wasn't random but precisely calibrated to forge the consciousness you were meant to develop. This isn't about justifying abuse. It's about understanding why your soul chose, or was chosen for, the exact circumstances that would create your strength. Here's what Jung understood that changes everything. Consciousness doesn't develop through comfort. It develops through crisis. The deepest psychological strength, the most profound awareness, the highest consciousness, all emerge from navigating impossible circumstances. And toxic families create the exact conditions that force souls to develop capacities most people never need. Jung called this initiation through ordeal. Strong souls aren't born strong, they're forged strong by environments that demand strength for survival. Your toxic family wasn't random bad luck. It was the crucible specifically designed to create the psychological infrastructure required for the consciousness you're meant to carry. Most people don't need that infrastructure because they're not meant for that consciousness. Before we go further, understand, this isn't about excusing abuse or glorifying suffering. Jung wasn't saying toxic families are good or that abuse is justified. He was observing a pattern. The strongest, most awakened individuals he worked with, almost universally, came from the most difficult family backgrounds. And this pattern revealed something about how consciousness develops. The first reason explains what toxic families force you to develop. Jung's first observation: strong souls are born into toxic families because toxic environments force you to develop psychological independence at an early age. When your family can't provide safety, love, or guidance, you have to find it within yourself. And this early self-reliance creates psychological infrastructure most people never develop. Think about healthy families. Children can depend on parents for emotional regulation, for wisdom, for safety. They don't need to develop these capacities internally because they're provided externally. But toxic families don't provide these things. If you want emotional stability, you have to create it yourself. If you want wisdom, you have to find it yourself. If you want safety, you have to build it yourself. One of Jung's patients described this forced development. My parents were chaos. I couldn't depend on them for anything. Not comfort, not guidance, not safety. So by age 7, I was essentially parenting myself. I learned to regulate my own emotions, make my own decisions, create my own stability. Jung said this forced independence created psychological muscles most adults don't have. I'd developed in childhood what most people never develop at all. This is what Jung meant by precocious individuation. You individuated, became psychologically independent, before you should have needed to. Not from choice, but from necessity. Your toxic family forced you to develop a self-sufficient psychological structure years or decades before most people begin that process. The strength this creates is profound. You can stand alone because you've always had to. You can self-regulate because no one regulated you. You can trust your own knowing because you've never had reliable external guidance. These capacities, forged in childhood crisis, are exactly what awakening requires later. You'll recognize this if you've always been mature for your age, if you've been told you're unusually self-sufficient, if you've parented yourself, and often your parents from early childhood. This isn't just resilience, it's forced development of capacities that become essential for the consciousness work you're meant to do. But early independence is just one gift toxic families give. The second reason reveals something even more crucial. Strong souls are born into toxic families because childhood suffering creates the capacity to hold darkness, both your own and others. If you're meant to do deep consciousness work, you need to be able to sit with shadow material without breaking, and toxic childhoods train you for exactly this. Before awakening work, most people have never truly faced darkness. They've lived relatively safe lives and haven't developed tolerance for psychological intensity. But Jung observed that people from toxic families have been immersed in darkness from the beginning. Abuse, neglect, chaos, trauma. They've learned to survive in conditions that would shatter people with easier backgrounds. One of Jung's analysans described this capacity. I went to therapy groups where people would cry about relatively minor childhood disappointments. Meanwhile, I'd survived abuse, abandonment, violence. Not that my trauma was worse, but I'd developed capacity to hold intense darkness that they hadn't needed to develop. Jung said this capacity was essential for the shadow work I was meant to do. I couldn't guide others through their darkness if I couldn't hold my own. This is what Jung meant by the gift of the wound. Your childhood trauma wasn't just damage, it was training. You learned to hold more pain, more fear, more darkness than people with easier lives. And this capacity, as brutal as its development was, is exactly what makes you capable of the deep work awakening requires. The capacity manifests as unusual emotional tolerance. You can sit with others' pain without needing to fix it. You can face your own shadow without collapsing. You can hold intensity that makes others uncomfortable, not because you're stronger morally, but because you've been forced to develop psychological musculature through early exposure to darkness. You'll recognize this if people come to you with their deepest pain. If you're the one others turn to with what they can't tell anyone else. If you can hold space for darkness that frightens people with easier backgrounds. Your toxic family gave you, unwillingly, traumatically, the capacity to be a container for shadow. But holding darkness is just one development. The third reason reveals why your suffering made you perceptive. Here's what Jung discovered. Strong souls are born into toxic families because surviving toxic environments requires developing hypervigilance, constant monitoring of others' emotional states for self-protection. And this hypervigilance, when healed, becomes powerful intuition and empathy that awakened work requires. Think about toxic family dynamics. You had to constantly read the room for danger. Is dad angry? Is mom having a breakdown? Is violence coming? Children in chaotic homes develop extraordinary sensitivity to others' emotional states because survival depends on it. You learn to sense what people were feeling before they expressed it because you needed advance warning. One of Jung's patients described this development. I could always tell when my alcoholic father was about to explode. I'd sense his rage building before he showed any outward signs. I developed this in childhood as survival mechanism. Jung said this hypervigilance, once I'd healed the trauma driving it, became profound intuitive capacity. I could sense people's emotional states, their shadows, their unspoken material. The survival skill became a gift. This is what Jung called wounded perception becoming second sight. The hypervigilance that kept you safe in childhood becomes, after healing, the ability to perceive psychological material others miss. You read people deeply because you had to learn to read danger. And this capacity is exactly what's needed for consciousness work involving others. The transition from wound to gift requires healing the trauma. Hypervigilance driven by fear is exhausting. But the same perceptive capacity, once fear is processed, becomes intuition, the ability to sense truth beneath surface presentation. Your toxic family forced you to develop perception that, once healed, becomes profound wisdom. You'll recognize this if you've always been able to sense what people aren't saying, if you read emotional atmospheres accurately, if you know things about people you have no logical way of knowing. This isn't psychic ability. It's highly developed perception forged in childhood necessity. But perception is just one skill toxic families develop. The fourth reason reveals something even more essential. If you're recognizing yourself, forced early independence, capacity to hold darkness, intuitive perception from hypervigilance, Jung would say, your toxic family wasn't random. It was precisely what you needed to develop the capacities your soul's work requires. Before we continue, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises designed to help you find your way within. Click below to get true self-discovery. Now, these final reasons reveal the deepest purpose of your difficult origins. Jung's fourth observation. Strong souls are born into toxic families because difficult childhoods shatter your identification with collective values and social conditioning. When family, the first collective, fails you, you can't blindly trust collective narratives. And this skepticism is essential for the consciousness work of seeing through societal illusions. Think about people from healthy families. They learn, family is good, authority is trustworthy, systems work, following rules brings safety. They internalize collective values because those values served them. But toxic families teach the opposite. Authority failed you, systems didn't protect you, following rules didn't bring safety. You learned early that collective narratives are lies. One of Jung's analysans described this. I never trusted societal stories about how life works because my family proved they were false. Family is everything. My family was hell. Parents always loved their children. Mine didn't. Play by the rules and you'll be safe. I played by the rules and got abused anyway. Jung said this disillusionment with collective narratives positioned me to see through them later. I couldn't be fooled by societal conditioning because I'd already seen it fail catastrophically. This is what Jung meant by liberation through disillusionment. People from healthy families often carry naive faith in collective values well into adulthood, but toxic families destroy that faith early. And while this is painful, it's also liberating. You can't be controlled by narratives you've already seen through. You can't be manipulated by promises you know are false. The skepticism this creates is essential for awakening work. Awakening requires seeing through collective illusions. People from easy backgrounds often struggle with this because they're still invested in believing societal narratives. But you learned young that collective promises are often lies. Your toxic family gifted you with disillusionment that becomes wisdom. You'll recognize this if you've always questioned what everyone else accepts, if you can't trust authority automatically, if societal values feel hollow to you. This isn't cynicism. It's clear sight developed through early betrayal by the first collective you encountered. But breaking collective identification is just preparation. The fifth reason reveals the ultimate purpose. Strong souls are born into toxic families because at a level beyond ego, your soul chose, or was chosen for, the exact circumstances required to forge the consciousness you're meant to develop. Not punishment, not accident. Precise calibration of challenge to potential. This is where Jung ventures into the mystical. He observed that the most awakened individuals all had childhoods that seemed perfectly designed to force specific developments. Not random trauma that created exactly the capacities their life's work would require, as if something beyond conscious awareness matched soul to circumstance. One of Jung's most profound patients described this realization. I spent years angry at being born into my toxic family. Then during deep work, I had a recognition. At some level beyond ego, I'd chosen this. Not the child me, the soul me. I needed exactly this family to develop exactly these capacities to do exactly this work. The recognition didn't erase the pain, but it transformed resentment into understanding. My toxic family was my initiation, not my punishment. This is what Jung meant by the soul's curriculum. Your ego didn't choose your family, your soul did. Or perhaps more accurately, there's a level of reality where souls and circumstances match according to what consciousness needs to develop. Your toxic family was the exact challenge required to forge your exact strengths. This doesn't justify abuse, doesn't mean suffering is good, doesn't excuse toxic parents, but it reframes your difficult origin from cosmic injustice to precise preparation. You weren't randomly damaged, you were specifically forged. And the capacities you developed through your toxic childhood are exactly what your deepest work requires. You'll recognize this if you've noticed that your worst wounds became your greatest gifts. If the capacities you need for your work are exactly the capacities your toxic family forced you to develop, if your life has a strange coherence, as if even the terrible parts serve the whole, why strong souls are born into toxic families. Toxic families force early psychological independence. Self-reliance most never develop. Suffering creates capacity to hold darkness. Tolerance for shadow work. Hypervigilance becomes intuition. Survival skill transforms into perceptive gift. Difficult childhoods break collective identification. Disillusionment becomes clear sight. Your soul chose the exact challenge it needed. Precise calibration of wound to work. Jung would want you to understand. This isn't about glorifying abuse or excusing toxic parents. Your family's behavior was wrong. Your suffering was real. Your pain matters. But there's another layer of reality where that suffering served a purpose, forging you into someone capable of consciousness most people never access. Strong souls require strong initiation, not because suffering is noble, but because certain capacities can only develop through certain challenges. Your toxic family created conditions that forced you to become strong, perceptive, independent, and capable of holding darkness. These aren't pleasant developments, but they're essential for the work you're meant to do. Most people with easy childhoods never develop these capacities because they never need them. But you were meant for work that requires them. And so you were born into the exact circumstances, however toxic, that would forge them. Not punishment, preparation. If you came from a toxic family and you've spent years asking, why me? Jung would tell you, Because you're strong enough to transform poison into medicine. Not everyone can. Most people would have been destroyed by what you survived. But you weren't, because you're a strong soul, and strong souls get strong initiations. This doesn't mean you should be grateful for abuse, doesn't mean you shouldn't be angry, doesn't mean the pain doesn't matter. Process the trauma, feel the rage, grieve what you didn't get. That work is essential. But once you've processed it, consider, what did this forge in you? Your early independence, your capacity to hold darkness, your intuitive perception, your skepticism of collective lies, your ability to do work that requires exactly these capacities. Your toxic family gave you, unwillingly, traumatically, the tools for consciousness work most people aren't equipped for. You're not damaged goods, you're forged steel. The fire that formed you was brutal, but it created something that couldn't be created any other way. Your wound is your initiation. Your trauma is your training. Your toxic family was your first teacher, teaching you through pain what you couldn't learn through comfort. Find the gift without denying the wound. Use what was forged in you. Do the work only you can do because of what you survived. Transform your poison into medicine, not just for yourself, but for others still suffering. That's what strong souls do. They don't just survive their toxic families. They transmute the suffering into consciousness that serves the collective healing. You weren't born into that family as punishment. You were born into it as preparation. Now, use what it gave you, however painful the giving, to become what you're meant to become. Subscribe to explore Jung's insights on transforming childhood wounds into consciousness gifts. To dive even deeper into Jung's revolutionary psychology and what it means for your spiritual awakening, click the recommended video on your screen now.